Welcome. We're diving straight into a week packed with really profound geopolitical shifts and tensions.
Indeed.
Our mission today is a deep dive analysis. We're looking at America's, well, let's call it an escalating military posture and some significant policy changes across South America.
That's right.
We've got a comprehensive stack of sources detailing intensified anti-drug operations, but also, crucially, the severe diplomatic fallout that's resulted.
And the context here is absolutely vital. We need to dissect the facts. This massive deployment of U.S. naval power, the dramatic policy move labeling cartels as narco-terrorists,
A huge step.
and the immediate diplomatic rupture with key Latin American nations. We're really aiming to distill whether this escalation is, strictly speaking, a war on transnational crime, or if perhaps the underlying objectives point towards broader geopolitical goals.
Okay. And this analysis, drawing from a really wide synthesis and real-time insights across a diverse range of global sources, is brought to you by our sponsor, ProWave AI. This deep dive is generated by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application designed to give you global intelligence instantly. So let's start with the physical presence on the ground, or rather on the water. We saw a pretty dramatic increase in U.S. military commitment this past week. What are the key facts there? The deployment, the operations?
Well, first we have to talk about the scale. It's enormous. The U.S. Department of Defense confirmed it deployed the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group.
The big one.
Exactly. One of the largest, most powerful naval assets they have. It arrived in the Caribbean and surrounding Latin American waters in late October 2025. That sends a very visible, undeniable signal. A real show of force.
And this wasn't just parking a ship there, was it?
No, not at all. This deployment coincided directly with a significantly intensified kinetic campaign. Since early September 2025, reports indicate at least 15 suspected drug trafficking vessels have been destroyed. Yes, and casualties reportedly numbering up to 62. That's as of October 31st. And critically, this campaign expanded strategically. Since October 22nd, these operations have explicitly moved beyond the Caribbean into the Eastern Pacific Ocean as well.
Okay. The military expansion is clear. But you mentioned the legal side that seems arguably even more significant. The U.S. government really changed the game this week by officially labeling certain drug cartels narco-terrorist organizations. Which group specifically?
They named the National Liberation Army, or ELN.
Colombian group.
Yes, Colombian guerrillas deeply involved in drug trafficking, extortion for decades, and also Tren de Aragua.
That's the Venezuelan game we hear so much about.
Highly structured, transnational Venezuelan origins, but it's metastasized, really spread across South America. Now, this narco-terrorist designation, it fundamentally shifts the focus. It moves things from simple drug interdiction, which is essentially a maritime law enforcement task, to potentially full-scale counterterrorism operations. That changes the rules of engagement significantly. It provides justification for a much wider use of lethal force.
And the diplomatic fallout was immediate?
Instantaneous and severe. Simultaneously, the U.S. Treasury hit Colombian President Gustavo Petro, his family, and various officials with sanctions.
On what grounds?
Accusing them of tolerating these cartels. Colombia's response, they immediately recalled their ambassador from the U.S.
Wow.
And it wasn't just Colombia. Other regional governments, Brazil notably among them, expressed really strong opposition. They see these actions as unilateral U.S. military interventions, potentially violating national sovereignty.
So, okay, boiling this down,
Okay.
what does it all mean? We've got two very strong, very conflicting stories driving this whole situation. Let's start with the U.S. side. What's the Trump administration's stated reason?
Their justification is centered on homeland security, combating these, quote, transnational criminal organizations and stemming the fentanyl crisis hitting the U.S.
And they're linking it directly to production increases.
Yes, they cite intelligence suggesting Colombia's current cocaine production is something like 6 times higher than it was back in the Pablo Escobar era.
6 times? That's a staggering figure.
It is. And to underscore that official stance, there's the existing $50 million bounty on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. explicitly accuses him of leading a narcotics organization.
So the message is, this is state-sponsored, it's an existential threat.
That's the clear message from the administration, yes.
Okay, but here's where it gets complicated, right? If the stated mission is stopping fentanyl, does the sheer scale of this naval deployment, a carrier strike group, actually match the intelligence on where the fentanyl is primarily coming from?
Well, that is the absolute central question being raised by analysts, places like Chatham House, Sky News. It's a critical point we found synthesizing the sources for this deep dive. The U.S. sent its largest naval asset, this carrier group, to patrol maritime routes near Venezuela and in the Caribbean. Yet the DEA data cited in our sources consistently suggests the vast majority of illicit fentanyl isn't coming by sea near Venezuela.
Where is it coming from then?
It's primarily manufactured in clandestine labs in Mexico and then transported into the U.S. mostly via land routes across the border.
Ah, so not the deep maritime channels where the carrier group is positioned.
Largely not, according to that DEA data.
So that's the core tension here, this seeming disconnect, the disproportion maybe between the asset deployed and the reported nature of the primary fentanyl threat.
Precisely. That disconnect is the main reason why analysts are asking quite pointedly whether the primary motivation is truly counter-narcotics or if it serves other, perhaps deeper geopolitical aims.
Such as?
Well, the obvious one being suggested is regime change, particularly concerning Venezuela.
And how are the governments on the receiving end reacting to that narrative?
They strongly assert it is about regime change. Venezuela's President Maduro flatly denies all the U.S. claims. He insists on national sovereignty, condemns the U.S. actions as fabrications, basically pretexts.
Is his government offering any counter-evidence?
Well, they've publicized their own counter-drug efforts. Recently, they highlighted the interception of 3 drug smuggling aircraft, arguing they are taking action domestically responsibly.
Okay, so with these high-stakes disagreements, these competing narratives, we're seeing different paths forward emerging, different courses of action from the key players. What are they proposing?
Right, we can really identify 3 distinct courses of action unfolding right now. Course A is the U.S. approach. Intensified military action, continued kinetic strikes against vessels, and crucially, the highly tense possibility of future ground strikes inside Venezuela. That's paired with ongoing economic pressure through sanctions.
A very hard line. What's course B?
Course B is being led primarily by Colombia's President Petro. It involves diplomatic resistance, recalling the ambassador, mounting a legal defense against sanctions, while also pursuing his own domestic peace strategy with various armed groups within Colombia.
Interesting. Is he completely shutting out the U.S.?
Not entirely, and this is intriguing. Petro is also seeking, it seems, cooperative anti-mafia strategies. He actually invited the recently resigned U.S. Southern Command Chief, Admiral Halsey.
The top U.S. military commander for the region just stepped down?
Yes, Admiral Halsey. Petro invited him to serve as his security advisor. It looks like an attempt to integrate U.S. expertise, perhaps, but into a Colombian-led framework.
Fascinating. And course C?
Course C comes from the UN and other regional bodies. It's essentially a strong appeal for immediate restraint, for dialogue, respect for sovereignty, and adherence to international law. UN experts, for instance, have specifically condemned those lethal strikes against vessels in international waters.
What did they call them?
Extrajudicial killings.
Strong language. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. Moving from the high-level strategy rooms and diplomatic cables down to the ground level, how are these tensions actually playing out locally across the region? And what's the chatter like? What does social media sentiment tell us about which narrative might be gaining traction?
Well, on the ground, the impact is quite measurable. Venezuela, for instance, has reportedly increased its militia recruitment drives. They've stepped up coastal defense exercises too, part of something called the Independence 200 plan.
A direct response to the U.S. deployment.
It certainly appears so. Meanwhile, you see the regional spillover of the criminal element itself. In Peru, for example, law enforcement recently captured a Venezuelan criminal linked to that group we mentioned, Tren de Aragua. It just shows the reach of these organizations.
Any positive notes amidst the tension?
There was one small diplomatic positive. Venezuela released 17 Colombian prisoners recently, which did ease some of the immediate bilateral tension between just those 2 countries.
Okay. And the social media pulse? What's X telling us?
Well, analyzing sentiment on X, particularly around certain hashtags, reveals really deep polarization.
Such as?
Hashtags like hashtag Trump, hashtag Antifa, hashtag border. Sentiment related to hashtag Antifa, hashtag border issues is overwhelmingly negative, somewhere in the 60% to 70% negative range. Suggesting perhaps a profound public anxiety, at least among those users, regarding domestic security challenges and how they might connect to these broader issues.
And how do different news sources seem to align with or maybe fuel that charged sentiment?
You see clear alignments. Sources like, say, Red State and PJ Media strongly support the narratives around strict law and order, police crackdowns domestically. They echo that rhetoric.
And internationally?
International news agencies like China's Xinhua or Yangtze tend to take a very critical stance towards the U.S. actions in the Caribbean. They often frame it as imperialistic, provocative.
What about more traditional mainstream sources?
Neutral, fact-based reporting, the kind you see from Reuters or the Associated Press, tends to get more mixed or neutral responses online, which might highlight, a public preference for less partisan coverage, even if the really negative sentiment dominates certain online conversations.
It sounds like the sources are suggesting the U.S. administration views this whole thing, foreign narcotics, domestic unrest, as interconnected, part of the same threat.
Exactly. That link between foreign policy and domestic unrest is a critical theme emerging from the source analysis.
How so?
This is where we encounter that very explosive claim from a Venezuelan defector.
Right, I saw reports on this. What's the allegation?
The defector alleged that back in 2012, the Venezuelan regime provided some $20 million in cash to U.S. radical left groups.
Specifically naming names.
Yes, specifically citing a Black Lives Matter co-founder, Opal Tometi. The stated purpose was allegedly to promote unrest within the U.S., and the allegation continues that this funding later extended toward Antifa groups as well.
Okay. Now, given the source a defector, likely seeking asylum or favorable treatment, is there any independent verification of this $20 million claim, or is this mainly being used by the administration?
Our sources indicate there's currently no independent verification of that specific financial claim. However, the allegation itself is being actively utilized by the U.S. administration
As justification?
as primary evidence, they say, of external destabilization efforts targeting the U.S., requiring a robust response. This includes floating the idea of potential ICAO charges against these groups.
ICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's usually for the mafia, organized crime syndicate.
Precisely. Applying RICO here is legally profound. It suggests the administration views these groups not just as political actors, however radical, but as components of a coordinated, destabilizing criminal enterprise requiring the maximum legal pushback.
Okay, so looking ahead then, what are the most likely immediate developments we should all be watching for in the next few days, maybe the next couple of weeks, as these tensions continue to simmer?
Well, several key things to track. First, the military operations themselves. The sustained deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group isn't likely ending tomorrow, and we need to watch for ongoing kinetic strikes, both in the Caribbean and now the Eastern Pacific.
And the ground strike possibility.
That remains the major point of tension, yes. Whether the U.S. government actually authorizes ground operations inside Venezuelan territory is perhaps the most critical thing to watch militarily.
What about the diplomatic and economic fronts?
We expect the U.S. to finalize a new trade agreement with China very soon. President Trump is meeting President Xi Jinping in South Korea in late October. And following that, a trade deal with Brazil is also anticipated, likely late October or early November.
So engagement with other major powers continues despite the rupture with Colombia and Venezuela.
It appears so. These trade deals signal that ongoing track of engagement.
And Venezuela's response?
We anticipate Venezuela will continue its diplomatic appeals, trying to rally international and regional support against what it perceives as U.S. aggression. And domestically, expect continued military preparedness activities under that Independence 200 plan.
So let me leave you, our listener, with this thought. Given that strategic expansion into the Eastern Pacific, the really severe diplomatic fallout, and this highly contested intelligence picture around fentanyl's primary source and routes, does this mark a truly genuine, data-driven shift in the war on drugs? Or is it perhaps a more calculated maneuver aimed at achieving geopolitical objectives that might be separate from narcotics control? Something for you to consider as these complex events continue to unfold. And that wraps up our deep dive into the U.S. military escalation in South America for this week. Just a reminder that this synthesis, was constructed using cutting-edge AI technology.
That's right.
Pulling from incredibly diverse real-time sources, everything from traditional news outlets to social media activity on X to provide this comprehensive picture. You can get this kind of AI-powered news on demand, track global events as they happen by subscribing to Stylo News. Just visit www.stylonews.com, that's STYLO news.com, to start your free trial today. Thank you so much for joining us for this really essential conversation. Please do follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms for continued, unbiased global intelligence updates.